Like tonight, nearly 13,000 people are spending their time on strike. The labor contract between the UAW and the big three automakers expired just before midnight.
Yeah, without a new deal, an unprecedented simultaneous strike against Ford, GM, and Stellantis started immediately. The UAW president notified Ford workers in Wayne, Stellantis workers in Toledo, and GM workers in Missouri that they were the first to walk out.
Ford says it has already laid off 600 workers here in Michigan. Here to help us really understand this targeted strike, Wayne State Professor of Management Marick Masters. We also have labor attorney Bob Finkel. Thank you both so much for being here with us this
Pleasure
evening.
to be with you.
I want to start with you. This is the first time a simultaneous strike has hit the big three, but they are only walking out of the three plants. What is the strategy behind it? Why not everyone at once?
Well, the strategy is to start with a modest level of pain inflicted on the company and then escalate if necessary. The hope is that this will be enough to induce the companies to come back to the table with a better offer, and if that's not forthcoming in the short term, they're not going to wait too long, then they're going to strike some other plants and ratchet up the pressure. And they've reserved the right to ultimately strike all three companies company-wide.
Now, Bob, for you, I guess, is this type of targeted strike even legal? And are they able to pick specific locations like this?
That's a good question, because there's a concept under the National Labor Relations Act of partial strikes or intermittent strikes, which are not protected activity. I haven't seen that issue being raised anywhere, but that's something that I thought of. And although you have a very, very pro-union and pro-employee NLRB, and before you even got to decide the issue, we'll probably all be dead with the shortage of help the NLRB has in processing cases.
I want to switch back to you. How quickly do you think the big three will feel this? How long will it take?
Well, I think they'll feel it immediately. I mean, a company-wide strike would have cost each company about $500 million per week.
Per week.
I think that this being three assembly plants, not component plants, is more limited. And certainly a few days is something that they can tolerate, so to speak, from a financial standpoint. But they're mindful that things can take a life of their own in a strike, and that they can ratchet up the pressure and you can turn around before you know it, and this strike has gone on for several days. And if they start striking components plants, then there are going to be more people shut down, essentially laid off or locked out, whatever the case might be. And you could have, like you did in 1998, literally a company-wide shutdown just based on a strike at two plants. And I think that, if they get to that point, clearly it's going to become a real test of economic power and which side caves first.
All right, Bob. So the UAW, they filed a unfair labor practice complaint with the NLRB a few weeks ago. Are those complaints still active?
Are those complaints what?
Still active.
I assume they are. The only reason that I would think a union would file something like that is because if you strike, the employer can hire replacements, either permanent or temporary. If you're striking over an unfair labor practice and protesting the unfair labor practices that the company allegedly committed, the company cannot permanently replace. If it's an economic strike, which this is, I believe, the employer is free to permanently replace. But in this situation, I think it's a hypothetical question that that's not going to happen, because I don't believe either any employer is going to replace anybody.
I want to ask both of you, in 2019, I was a journalist up in Flint and extensively covered the strike against GM. I know that went more than a month. We were outside the Flint assembly plant. I believe it was 40 days. That's my experience with covering strikes. Do you see this one potentially going that long? Because you do have a handful of people who now this is their second strike that they've made the strike pay.
Yeah.
And what do you think for the duration? I know it's impossible to guess, but do you guess days, weeks, or months?
Well, I think it's conceivable that it could be a 40-day strike.
Okay.
The parties are far apart, and it's going to depend on how insistent the union is and all of its demands, whether all of its demands are weighted equally, and at the same time how forthcoming the companies are. I think that if you see strikes occur on a wave basis where where you're escalating, there's going to be some sort of counter response from the companies. They're not going to let the union stay in control of the timing of these strikes, and that will cause things to escalate further. And you hope you don't get into a situation where there's a strike that could last much longer than that, because that will be crippling to all sides.
Bob?
I have no idea how long this will last.
We appreciate the honesty.
No, I don't. I mean, some people, I could look at it as a suicide cubicle. I mean, I don't know. Both parties got to be reasonable, and so far neither of them seem to be. And I don't want to say it's mutual stupidity, because that's insulting, and I don't mean to insult anybody. But you got to go off the record and say, hey, what are we really going to do here, and what we need. And they're going to have to figure it out. And I think one problem is there's not too much experience in this.
We appreciate the insight. Again, Wayne State Management Professor Marick Masters and also labor and employment attorney Bob Finkel. Thank you both.
Thank you.